and anticipated in the second quarter, and that was actually driven by a rise in the rand price of exported goods and services compared to imports. The deficit shrank to an annualized 0.9% of GDP, or 64.6 billion rand, down from revised 1.5% in the previous quarter, according to the South African Reserve Bank on Thursday. Now, the ninth consecutive current account deficit, and coupled with a budget shortfall of 4.5% of GDP, South Africa remains vulnerable to external shocks, posing risks to its economic stability. This morning, joining me from South Africa is Professor Waldo Krugell. He's an economist at Northwest University. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us on the show.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Professor Krugell, we can't actually hear you very well.
Well, I'll try and speak up. Maybe that helps.
Okay, probably we just need to optimize the audio level. But then let me just get your response. I will do that, Professor Krugell. What factors would you say contributed most significantly to South Africa's current account deficit, narrowing more than expected in quarter two, and how sustainable are these improvements in the long term?
The one major factor that made the biggest contribution was actually the high price of gold. Gold contributed with a 24% increase on the price level, and that really made for merchandise exports, or the value of merchandise exports, to increase significantly, and that brought us these improved both current account and trade account surpluses, or reductions in the deficit, sorry, let me put it that way, improvements. So the sustainability of that is going to depend on uncertainty in the international economy. I think ahead of the elections in the US and a time when interest rates around the world are decreasing, we'll have to wait and see what happens with the gold price and what that means for our current account.
All right. So, what does this actually, suggest about the country's financial health and its ability to meet external obligations now?
I think the financial health doesn't look bad. The indicators don't quite reflect the optimism yet that we are seeing in terms of the JSE, in terms of the bond market, and in terms of the exchange rate. There's still a lag compared to what I think the sentiment is out there, and the optimism about the new government of national unity. But overall, we are sort of turning a corner, and I think the positive GDP growth rate in the second quarter is indicative of that. And we're looking ahead towards lower fuel prices, a lower inflation rate on average, and hopefully some interest rate cuts this year that will also contribute to increased consumer spending and some increased growth.
So do you think this might actually influence South Africa's short and long-term economic stability plan, especially when you look at the broader context of trade performance and the vulnerability to global market fluctuations?
Long-term, we are definitely going to be under pressure, mainly because we are a small open economy, and the bulk of our exports are not particularly value-added, like you find in many African economies, that we're selling primary goods. In the case of South Africa, it's mainly minerals and some agricultural products. And then the market for our manufactured goods, like automotive parts and vehicles, etc., that's internationally quite under pressure. So what's happening in China, if their growth is slowing, that means a smaller market for our minerals. And if the world economy slows slightly, it means a smaller market for our manufactured exports. So overall, it's not going to be easy going forward, and it depends a lot on factors that are outside of the control of our local policymakers.
Well, you said it's not going to be easy, but then we still see a bit of appreciation in the rand when you look at, of course, the rand with the dollar and some other commodities, or some other currencies rather. Don't you think that could, in a way, improve the economic benefits that is meant to accrue to South Africa?
Absolutely. I think the stronger rand really is to the benefit of lower inflation in South Africa. That's quite important since we import fuel and that translates into costs. So a stronger rand helps a lot. And yes, I think a large part of the stronger rand is a financial story. As the US gets ready to cut rates, there's just a flow of money away from US markets and the dollar, and some of it ends up in emerging economies like South Africa. And we've seen the benefit of that in our stock exchange and also in our bond market. And we hope to see more of this going forward during the course of this year and next year. But the exact uh, amount of all of this is going to depend.
So it probably would be all smiles for the South African government now, even as its projected consolidated budget deficit is said to be reaching about 4.5% of GDP compared to before. But then, what fiscal policies would be essential to further manage, such shortfall, and how might the deficit affect the government's ability to fund essential services?
The government is still under pressure to really consolidate the public finances. They are getting some relief from the lower yields on the bonds that they've issued, but the economy has not really started growing yet, which means that their tax income is still limited. And all these ratios that you see, the debt to GDP or the deficit to GDP, if GDP is not really growing, that means that they have to think about cutting spending and consolidating spending. uh, this is an ongoing process, and in the past week, Treasury has already confirmed that they are going to stay the course with this. But the challenges are out there. They have to try and manage down the public sector wage bill, which is a big component of their spending. And there are a lot of claims that the new government of national unity need to look at relief from value added tax. They need to reform the tax on petrol. They need to spend more on grants. So a lot of people shouting for lower taxes and more spending, but they actually have to head the opposite way and think about cutting spending.
And now that we're even talking about the current account deficits and the rand's exchange rate and all, do you think that the rate cuts by the Federal Reserve, or of course the Federal Reserve, would have any meaningful impact on those two variables?
They are. Everybody's waiting for the Fed, though there are some other central banks who've already been cutting. The Fed's the big one. And I think once they start cutting rates, our economy can follow as well. At the moment, our monetary policy is clearly restrictive. The repo rate is too high considering the level of inflation, and they want to ease monetary policy. And we'll see what the impacts are. I think it's definitely going to benefit the spending side of the economy. And there's some debate on the impact it would have on the exchange rate. But if we're all in this lowering cycle, I don't think it's going to influence the exchange rate unduly, particularly if the government of national unity can show that they are delivering on more of their promises and really build on the confidence and the optimism that's out there about the economy.
All right, so moving on as we wrap, Professor Krugell, what structural reforms would you profile in terms of solutions to actually deal with the deficit that we've seen and probably ensure stability in the economy and, of course, the rand?
The big story is to get the economy growing faster. We've really grown slow over the last 10 plus years. And for that, I think infrastructure investment is the key. We all know of the challenges faced by the ESCOMs and the transnets in the economy. All kinds of transport and logistics need an upgrade, service delivery, water. All of those are key points to focus on. And I think they're also in the government's view, the place that they're really going to put in their efforts to see if they can get the economy growing through, the president says, so turning the country into a building site.
Of course, we know that South Africa has a very potential economy, and a lot of South Africans will be hoping that the unity government will be able to do all that it takes in terms of pulling their minds together and driving economic growth for the country. Thank you so much, Professor Waldo Krugell, economist at Northwest University. It was nice talking to you.
Thank you.